Good morning and welcome back to the lecture series. We are discussing science fiction, and today we are going to discuss one of the pioneer works of science fiction, which is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein in response to a suggestion by the poet Lord Byron during the summer of 1816 that his house guests should each write a horror story. As a result of this, most of their story ideas centered around ghosts or vampires in the Gothic tradition. Although Frankenstein employs most of the formal properties of the science fiction genre and it is considered as one of the pioneer works of science fiction, it is never treated as a core science fiction work as such. So, a lot of times there is this dispute, this contention regarding whether to consider Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as science fiction or not. The novel was written at a time when the Gothic novel was in its vogue, newly established by European Romanticism. So, one could say that Gothic novel is an offshoot of European Romanticism, where the writings are mainly interested in the macabre, in the ghastly, in the dark aspects. It could be the dark aspects of the human nature. However, Frankenstein can also be interpreted as an archetype of a science fiction novel. So, how a science fiction novel should be written? It can be seen as a precursor of the sci-fi genre. So, J. Cudden considers this novel as an important text in the evolution of science fiction as a genre. So, Cudden says as follows: the long-term effect of this novel has been extraordinary. Frankenstein is a completely original work and innovation. The anonymous identikit monster created by Dr. Frankenstein is the product of scientific research, knowledge and skills. The doctor imparts life to a composite being constructed from bits of corpse. This kind of an idea has not been explored in literary writings before Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The idea of giving life to a monster by assimilating bits and parts of corpses. So, Frankenstein is written, as we know, in an epistolary form. It is set in the 18th century and it documents a fictional correspondence between Captain Robert Walton and his sister Margaret Walton Saville. So, Robert Walton is a failed writer who sets out to explore the North Pole in the hopes of expanding his scientific knowledge. As he is successful early on, the mission is soon interrupted, however, by seas that are full of impassable ice. So, Walton is trapped and he encounters over there a character called Victor Frankenstein. So, this is where during his expedition, Walton meets Victor Frankenstein, who has been traveling by a dog-drawn sledge across the ice and is weakened by the harsh cold weather. So, Walton takes Frankenstein aboard the ship, helps nurse him back to health and hears the fantastic tale of the monster that Frankenstein has created. So, as Frankenstein recuperates under Walton's nursing, he tells this tale of the monster that is a result of his scientific innovation, scientific experimentation. So, Victor first describes his early life in Geneva. at the end of a blissful childhood spent in the company of Elizabeth Lavenza. Now, the character of Elizabeth happens to be Victor's cousin according to the 1818 edition of Frankenstein, and she becomes his adopted sister in the 1831 version of the same work. So, we see that his childhood, the childhood of Victor, has been spent in the blissful company of Elizabeth and his friend Henry Clerval, right? And Victor subsequently enters the University of Ingolstadt to study natural philosophy and chemistry. At the university level, he is consumed by the desire to discover the secrets of life, and after several years of intense research, he comes up with some kind of conviction that he has been able to unravel the innermost, the deepest secrets of life. The most interesting point here is that Mary Shelley made her protagonist, Victor Frankenstein, a practicing scientist and gave him an interest in galvanic electricity, which is one of the advanced technologies of the early 1800s. So, we see that in early 1800s, when galvanic electricity was invented, it finds its reflection in Mary Shelley's work. This invention is at the root of the creation of Frankenstein. So, Galvani showed that stimulation of a dead frog's nerve by electrical current causes contraction of the muscle to which it is attached. Scientists were excited by the potential use of this new force, and research was conducted throughout Europe on the application of electricity in order to induce and sustain life. So, the electrical shock is the stimulating force that reanimates the dead body parts, which Frankenstein in turn uses to create this creature, right. So, armed with the knowledge he has long been seeking, Victor Frankenstein spends months feverishly and zealously fashioning this creature out of the old body parts. At one climactic night, one sees that in the secrecy of his apartment, he brings his creation to life. When he looks at the monstrosity that he has created, the result of all his experiments, the sight, however, horrifies him. So, after a fitful night of sleep, interrupted by the spectre of the monster that is looming over him, Victor runs into the streets, eventually wandering in remorse. He regrets already that he has created a monster. This monster is the result of his scientific invention. So, Victor runs into his friend Henry, who has come to study at the university, and he takes his friend back to his apartment. Though the monster is gone by then, Victor falls into a kind of feverish illness. So, after collecting the parts from the dead bodies, Victor Frankenstein does what can nowadays be called as artificially created life. Arguably, this creation is a kind of artificial life or life form that evolved from inanimate forms into animate. And this is like the worst fears turning true regarding what artificial life might become, the possibilities of artificial life, the power that such artificial life can assume. An alien life form motivated by a deep hatred for the human race that he feels not unreasonably has rejected him and must be punished for having done so. So, one sees that Frankenstein, after being created, is an epitome of monstrosity, but he is also an epitome of helplessness. He is huge, he is humongous, he is dangerous, he is completely unleashed, uh, cannot be controlled, but he is at the same time very lonely. He is an assemblage of uh, numerous dead bodies that has resulted in what he is, and this result is beyond the control of the master and the monster alike. They don't know what's going to happen next, neither the master nor the monster. He is furious, he hates humanity, and he has already rejected humanity. You know, this monster, this creation has already rejected humanity, and he ought to be punished. But who is going to punish him, right? So because he also has a component of human in him, he is made up of human parts. He looks like an alien, but he is nevertheless made up of human organs and parts. And very ironically, if we look at the title of this novel, he is Frankenstein. So when we have the creator's name as Victor Frankenstein, and this creation also called Frankenstein, we have a feeling as reader that they are related. They are blood relations. The creator and the created have a blood relation. They are kind of kin. So and in the end we see that the creation is actually killing the creator, right? Thereby pointing at the negative side of scientific creation, which can be some of which can be suicidal in nature. Some of the inventions, scientific inventions, that can be suicidal in nature, that can be self-devastating in nature. So it is not an accident that the story has exerted such an appeal over horror. Sickened by his horrific deed, Victor Frankenstein prepares to return to Geneva, to his family, and to as a way of returning to his healthy self, his normal self. However, just before departing Ingolstadt, he receives a letter from his father informing him that his youngest brother William has been murdered. So grief-stricken, Victor hurries home. While passing through the woods where William was strangled, he catches sight of the monster, and he becomes convinced that the monster is his brother's murderer. So, however, after arriving in Geneva, Victor finds that Justine Moritz, who is a kind, gentle girl that has been adopted by his household, his family, is accused and executed for his brother's murder. So Victor grows despondent, guilty, with the knowledge that the monster that he has created bears the responsibility for the death of two innocent people that he loves so much. So, as a way of easing his grief, Victor takes a vacation to the mountains. There the monster approaches him and admits to the murder of William, but at the same time we see that the monster begs for understanding. He says that he is lonely, he is shunned and forlorn, and he says that he struck out at William in a desperate attempt to injure Victor, who is his cruel creator. The creation himself feels that the act of creating him was a cruel one. So the monster begs Victor to create a mate for him to serve as his sole companion. Because he is made up of human parts, he now wants his own society. He is isolated. He wants a companion, a mate, right? Without which there is no purpose for living. So Victor refuses at first, horrified at the prospect of creating another monster. However, after much persuasion, the monster convinces Victor. After returning to Geneva, Victor heads for England, accompanied by Henry, to gather information for the creation of a female monster. So, leaving Henry in Scotland, he secludes himself uh, uh, on a desolate island in the Orkneys, and he works reluctantly at repeating his first experiment, his first successful experiment of creating this monster. So, one night, however, he is struck by doubts and the ethics and morality of his own action, because he is going to create a second monster now. And so Victor glances out of the window and sees the monster glaring in at him with a frightening grin, right? So, just like we see in Gothic novels, the element of the ghastly, the dark, especially the darkness that looms inside human nature, the monstrosity, the monstrous possibilities of the human race are all explored. The metaphor of the grisly, the metaphor of the uh, macabre, the dark, the bestiality, the bestial possibilities of the human race are some of the very important key elements informing Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, right? So, horrified by the possible consequences of his work, Victor destroys his new creation of the second monster midway. This enrages the monster, and he vows revenge on Victor. So, later that night, Victor uh, takes a boat out onto a lake and dumps the remains of the second creature in the water. The wind picks up and prevents him from returning to the island. In the morning, he finds himself ashore near an unknown town. Upon landing, he is arrested and informed that he will be tried for a murder that has been discovered the previous night. Victor denies any knowledge of this murder. However, when shown the body, he is shocked to see that it is none other than his friend, his dear friend Henry Clerval, with the mark of the monster's fingers on his neck. So, here once again a very fundamental question is posed onto the reader: who is the monster? Is it the scientist who is making such monstrous experiments and discoveries, inventions, right? So, Victor falls ill, raving and feverish, and is kept in prison until his recovery, after which he is acquitted of the crime, right? Here we see that the creator and the creation, their identity almost overlaps, right? So, the creation is the physical manifestation of monstrosity, but even before he was created, the idea was conceived by the creator, right? So, which Frankenstein are we talking about here? So, shortly after returning to Geneva with his father, Victor marries Elizabeth. The creature also murders Elizabeth on their wedding night. Victor vows to devote the rest of his life in finding the monster and exacting his revenge, and he soon departs to begin his quest. Victor tracks the monster ever northward into the ice, and that's why in the present time of the story he is found in the ice, you know, in a dog sled chase, where we see that the narrator finds him. So, Victor almost catches up with the monster, but the sea beneath them swells and the ice breaks, leaving an unbridgeable gap between the two of them. So, it is at this point that Walton encounters Victor, and the narrative catches up to the time of Walton's fourth letter to his sister. Walton tells the remainder of the story in another series of letters to his sister. Victor, who is already ill when the two men meet, worsens, his health deteriorates, and he finally dies shortly thereafter. So, when Walton returns several days later to the room in which the body lies, he is startled to see the monster weeping over Victor. So the monster perhaps has become lonelier and more rootless after the one that has created him has died, right? The monster, if he had any sort of human attachment with anyone, it was with none other than his creator. So this was kind of an intense love-hate relationship that they shared. The monster tells Walton of his immense solitude, suffering, hatred, and remorse, the kind of apathy that he feels towards human civilization. He asserts that now that his creator has died, he too can end his suffering, and the monster then departs for the northernmost ice to die. So, I mean, here one can see it's not only the question of death, but also death due to solitude, death due to lack of company, because once again, the monster has components of human parts and organs in him. He seeks company, he seeks, some kind of warmth and friendliness. And going to ice is also very symbolic. It's kind of a going to cold, going to into a frozen state, because there is a lack of warmth for him. There is nothing welcoming him. So why even has he been brought to life if there is no companion? Right? So whereas Shelley's fictional world had to deal with only one scientist whose experiment threatened the humanity, later on, we see in the modern times the society has to deal with capitalist ventures in pursuit of the potentially enormous profits in artificial intelligence, artificial life, cloning, and stem cell research. Although it is impossible to reanimate dead bodies, recent research in genetic engineering and biochemistry has gone on to, bring to light the opportunity of manipulating life forms, which is already happening a lot. As such, on a different level, Frankenstein could be conceived as a warning of the inherent dangers in technological developments of modern science fiction. So, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin Shelley's Frankenstein is a critique of science and its resultant experiments. It is a thoughtful comment and a commentary on the terrifying consequences of scientific experimentation with life. It is grounded on specific research, namely that of creating life in the laboratory without a mother's womb. It predicts modern research on cloning, and more than anything else, Frankenstein criticizes the way some scientists have been trying to control and manipulate nature. So, Mary Shelley's emphasis is not so much on the research itself as on some of the ethical issues that emerge from that research, and those ethical issues have not yet lost their social implications. So, Frankenstein can be rightly called the seminal science fiction text. As Donnerworth rightly comments, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein began a women's tradition in science fiction, a tradition that later incorporated the feminist technological utopia popular in the 19th century US, and that was also influenced by travel narrative and scientific romance. In Mary Shelley, Her Life, Her Fiction, Her Monsters, Annie Miller has recorded Mary's close observation of the scientific inventions and her profound interests in the works of the eminent scientists such as Humphrey Davy, Erasmus Darwin, and Luigi Galvani, so who are in the forefront of scientific discoveries in late 18th and early 19th century, right, who are at the heart of the scientific debates of her time, which is very effectively fictionalized by Shelley in her present novel Frankenstein. So, in the case of Frankenstein, issues become more complicated with the realization that the novel cannot really be slotted into any category. Right from its inception, Frankenstein has seen a series of reworkings. So, read variously as a cautionary fable against Faustian ambition, and a feminist critic of the male and male centric science and romanticism, as well as an allegorization of class relations and an ambivalent exploration of the human psyche, this work Frankenstein invites reinterpretation and revisiting. Frankenstein is not just a novel of terror based on rich and powerful imagination. Apart from that, it is a novel that includes elements of science fiction, psychological novel, Gothic novel, and also provides a social critique. But any attempt at finding some fixed meanings in the novel leads to confusion. Definition and categorization are repeatedly called into question by the novel. So, Frankenstein is the first novel to be powered by the theory of evolution, because Erasmus Darwin's theories of evolution, particularly his vermicelli experiment, was exploited and fictionalized by Mary Shelley in her novel Frankenstein. So, Erasmus Darwin was not only the biological ancestor of Charles Darwin, he was also the father of the theories of evolution that his much more famous grandson had developed. So, according to the critic Annie Miller, science fiction as a genre has three major characteristics. It is to be grounded on valid scientific research. It gives a prediction about the future of that research, and then lastly it offers a humanistic critique of either scientific technological inventions or the very nature of scientific thinking. One sees that all these characteristics can be found in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It is grounded on the specific research, namely that of creating life in the laboratory without the presence of or without the participation of a mother's womb. Secondly, it predicts the modern researches on cloning, and more than anything else, Frankenstein criticizes the way some scientists have been trying to control nature. So, taking the novel for science fiction, it may be observed that Mary Shelley's emphasis is not so much on the research itself as it is on some ethical issues that emerge from this research, scientific research. She is examining the ethical issues that have not yet lost their social implications, the ethical issues that always are concomitant with any kind of scientific experimentation. So, Frankenstein agrees to make a female companion for this monster subject to certain conditions. When his work is almost finished, Frankenstein pauses, thinking of the race of devils that might be raised up by the union between these two creatures, which will destroy humanity completely. The pervasive presence of the monsters may efface humanity entirely, right? So, that is why, I mean, Frankenstein hesitates, he flinches from creating the female counterpart. Having said that, this also reminds us of eugenics, the eugenic theory, right, where you know, the superior race, the correct species should exist. Although here it is even more cruel, because the monster wouldn't have been born without the intervention and without the maneuvering by the creator, the scientist himself. And now he kind of has double thoughts, he has his doubts whether this creature should propagate, should have a mate or not, which is cruel enough, right? So, Victor destroys what he has begun. The monster discovers the breach of contract, utters his direst threat, I quote, "I shall be with you on your wedding night," unquote. And then he disappears. And that's how he's killing Victor's partner. Just because he is experiencing a kind of loneliness, he does not want Victor also to get married. So these words shuddered Victor. Due to the horribly wrong experiment of science, Frankenstein lost his brother William, uh, and then Justine, who was an adopted servant in the household, his intimate friend Henry, his dearest beloved Elizabeth, his father Alphonse Frankenstein, and ultimately he lost his own life. He gave, so many things to this scientific discovery, to this invention. He gave whatever he had to this discovery. He, uh, kind of sacrificed everything, including his own life. Some of the questions that this work poses. First, if a new species is at all created by the scientists in the laboratory, what will be the social, psychological and moral status of that species in the modern world? Secondly, would not such creation of life in the laboratory disturb the existing ecological balance? The third issue, which is more poignant than the others for its direct attack on the investigator, may be as follows. Is not a modern scientist often disturbed by his or her conscience for inventing something, the consequence of which hardly lies within his own control? So it implies to a situation where the scientist, like Victor, becomes a slave to his own creation, a victim to his own creation. What is the use of one's intellect and hard toil if one is destined to be a slave, being unable to exercise one's free will? So, what is science doing to us? Is it giving us more freedom, or is it enslaving us? We are reminded of Victor's exclamation, "What glory would attend the discovery if I could banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to nay but violent death." If Victor were engaged only in finding ways of banishing disease from human frame, there would be no cause for his misery. Victor became a slave to his creation and therefore could not even exercise his own free will. Victor's mission therefore highlights some ethical questions, the type of which is raised at the end of the 20th century. Victor Frankenstein's last words are a guideline to science and to the scientists. Farewell, Walton. Seek happiness in tranquility and avoid ambition, even it be only the apparently innocent one of distinguishing yourself in science and discoveries. Yet, why do I say this? I have myself been blasted in these hopes, yet another may succeed. So, the success of Frankenstein as a science fiction, the first of its kind in English literature, owes much to Shelley's ethical concerns expressed in her novel. The writers of the 21st century almost echo Shelley when they express their concern that artificial creation of life may create a chaos in the world and that there should be limit to the interference with nature. In the present age of science and technology, Mary Shelley's science and scientific experiment in Frankenstein is no more a matter of mere fiction, but it has become a fact of science. In short, Frankenstein has become a cultural myth of the modern times, of the modern world, and it has provided us with a metaphor for the potentially disastrous results of thoughtless, reckless and overambitious scientific discoveries, because it raises some ethical concerns and issues as to the limits of a scientist's interference with nature. In the plot, Victor's search for the principle of life is projected in the novel as a scientist's search for the way to create life in a secular world, and his tragic fall is a moral example of the dangers of knowledge, the boundaries of knowledge, the limitations, the limits of knowledge, the limits of humanity, and the dangers associated with knowing, with knowledge. It is an extrapolation of current science and technology and its effects on the future worlds, on both the animate and the inanimate. It is a revelation of what is in store for humanity if science and technology are immorally or irresponsibly used. So, from Mary Shelley to the present time, the responsible science fiction writers have been focusing on the world transforming powers of science if they are exploited for the goodness of humanity. By and large, Frankenstein as a work is a pioneering and powerful treatise on the responsibilities and values of science with a thought experiment. We are going to conclude our lecture here today. Thank you.